Get ready to rock your style with Wicked Wanderings.
Introducing our brand new merch.
Cozy up in our Wicked hoodies.
Or flaunt your vibe in our sweet-ass t-shirt.
Join the Wicked Wanderings crew, explore the mysterious,
and head to our merch store now.
The link is in the show notes below. Stay curious, stay stylish, and keep on wanderings with Wicked Wanderings Podcast.
What are they drinking in Russia? Vodka.
Vodka. Tallywhacker.
Tallywhacker.
Have you never heard that?
You know what a tallywhacker is, right?
It's a penis.
No, it's the little flap thing for the zipper.
I don't like that.
That is what a tallywhacker is.
Where were they?
Did you know that fun fact?
I did not.
No, I don't know anything about a tallywhacker. Go ahead, Jess. Okay.
What's going on? This is John Olson, and I am the host of Scalarius. Scalarius is your new favorite paranormal and comedy podcast. At Scalarius, we talk to comedians about paranormal experiences they've had while on the road, whether it was in a hotel they were staying in, a bar, club, or theater they were performing in, or maybe it was just a story they were dying to tell. Either way, Scalarius is the podcast that you need to hear. You can find Scalarius anywhere there's podcasts, but specifically right here on Spotify.
Hello, Wanderers. I'm Jess.
And I'm Hannah.
And welcome to Wicked Wanderings. Hello, Hannah.
Hello, Jess. Chatuka.
Cocaine, and Jonathan.
Hey, thank you for having me back again. I'm not sure why you did, but I appreciate it.
We love
appreciate
having
you.
Yes. So last week, we started talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident, right?
Yes.
Where 9 hikers went missing, and it had taken a long time for the university to do anything about it, despite the family's pleas. The search parties eventually went out at the end of the last episode, and they found the hikers' tent in a fire pit a mile away. Then they found out what looked like a human knee.
Uh-oh.
Yes. So let's get going on this story.
Girl down.
Mm-hmm. So after they notified other search teams, the snow was excavated and they ended up finding 2 bodies.
Ooh.
Lying side by side. Both men, and they are not wearing jackets or pants. One has on a checkered shirt and a pair of swim trunks under long underwear. The left leg of the long underwear was torn away, and his feet are bare with snow wedged between his toes. The other body is slightly more covered in an undershirt, checkered shirt, long underwear briefs, and socks. The clothes on both bodies are shredded, leaving much of their discolored flesh exposed. One lies face down in the snow, his arms folded under his head like a pillow, and there are broken cedar branches lying beneath him. The other on his back, face turned upward, his mouth looked like it had been gotten by an animal, like maybe a bird.
There must have been a reason
There's,
for it, right?
Yeah, some kind
Like
of...
a robin or
Yeah.
a cardinal.
Yes,
like a
blue
bird.
jay.
Morning dove.
Morning.
Or were you talking about like ostrich?
Ostrich.
I don't think there's ostriches in Russia.
Yeah.
Peacock.
Peacock cock. So his mouth must have been gotten by an animal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll just
So it
leave
looks
it
like,
at that.
yeah. The searchers are still able to identify them, however. The man lying face up is Georgie Krivonischenko, and the other man is Yuri Doroshenko.
Good try.
I'm having hard times with words in general, let alone Russian last names.
That's all right. You tried.
So
So-
Georgie and Yuri.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Georgie and Yuri.
Okay.
There is also a search going on in a nearby ravine. Stepan Kurikov, who was the Manzi elder who has joined the searches, he also has a police dog. And he was a well-respected elder of the Manzi village, and his dog is getting anxious, and the kind of anxious before they are about to find something. They're in a spot they searched a few days before with no luck, and they are a few hundred yards from where the 2 other bodies were found. And the focus of the search had been shifted since the bodies were found and they were almost a mile away from the tent. A mile. The dog soon finds an area of saplings, and there was no doubt that the dog was onto something. The searchers began to dig, and they didn't have to dig very far because inches below the surface they hit something hard. They find a dark patch of cloth, and more snow is cleared. They make out a joint covered in wool. An elbow. They continue to dig until a human emerges. The arms are held across the chest in what looks like to be a defensive position. But they are clutching the birch, pulling the tree downward, giving it an awkward angle. The hiker is dressed more warmly than the other two, but not by much. He had on a sweater over a checkered shirt, a fur vest, and ski trousers. He is without a hat, gloves, and shoes, and his watch had stopped at 5:31. His body seemed to be in a position of suspended struggle, as if the victim had been fighting the elements until his last breath. This was the group's leader, Igor Dyatlov. And after the searchers found Dyatlov's body, they start to fan out from the birch tree, where the land fans upward in the direction towards the hiker's tent. Another police dog, Alma, starts to pace back and forth over a smooth patch of snow. The dog starts to dig, and the searcher joins in the effort, and a figure soon appears beneath the snow. It is Zina.
I'm sorry. So, one of their last names was Dyatlov?
Yeah, the leader.
Is that why they call it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Yes. Thanks for your permission. I'm just kidding. She is lying on her right side, face down with her arms twisted below her. Her face is dark and there's dried blood on it. Her right leg is bent as if she was mid-climb before collapsing. She is the first one to be dressed somewhat sensibly for the climate. She was wearing a hat, a ski jacket, and ski pants, but again, no boots, but had socks on her feet. The first 4 bodies were returned back to Sverdlovsk, and the shock and reality of the situation sets in on the friends and families, and they begin to look for someone to blame. Many hold the university to blame for allowing them to embark on such a dangerous hike. The Mansi are also mentioned as their hunters' footprints are not far from the hiker's route. A team of 30 men search an area of 30,000 square yards by poking 8-foot poles through the snow.
Oh.
So they lined up shoulder to shoulder and just would poke the snow, move another foot, poke the snow to see if they could get into...
Find another body?
Yeah. They aren't having much luck, so they actually request miners with metal detectors to come out so they can cross some deep ravines. And the miners actually showed up the next day with their metal detectors to see if they could get anything.
What were they hoping to find that was metal, though, if it was just bodies?
I'm sure some of their gear may have been metal. If they had gear on them, I don't know. If they had a watch. But you do have a point because they didn't find anything with their detectors.
So. I knew it!
So they joined the search by probing the snow with the rest of them. On March 1st, the new lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, shows up on the scene. And this is now a month after the hikers have died, and 5 of them are still missing. They have lost all hope of finding the rest of them alive, and now the search has changed to a recovery mission. Ivanov focuses on the fire pit around the cedar tree and determines that the fire had not burned for more than 2 hours. And they notice by the broken branches nearby that one of the men had actually climbed the tree to break branches to burn and had fallen in the process, which would have been consistent with the cuts on Doroshenko's body, as well as the branches found beneath him.
So did he realize oh shit, it's cold?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is what's so interesting about this whole case, because no one knows really what happened.
Yeah.
They know they left the tent in a hurry, and that 2 of them started a fire. 3 of them started up back towards the tent, and then the other 3 we'll talk about in a minute. Yeah, that's why this case is so intriguing. So once the men started the fire, it would have been warm enough to warm them, but it wouldn't have lasted for long. So the investigator believes that at least one other person was with them at the site at one point in time.
Wait, someone else besides who was in the party?
Well, someone of the party. I mean, I guess they wouldn't really know, but they just assumed it was one of the other hikers. But also, none of the hikers had boots on, because remember, they found the tent and all the boots were lined up. So you can kind of tell the difference in the footprints between a bare foot and
right,
boots.
absolutely.
Yeah. So the weather began to worsen that day and the searchers started to turn back, but another group actually found the hikers' storage shelter nearby, near the river. There was nothing amiss in this shelter aside from the meager amount of firewood, and I have a small theory about this shelter, but I will get to it later. And it was filled with necessary food and reserves that would have been necessary for their return trip. The unnecessary things they wouldn't need to hike up the mountain, that would have just added extra weight to their packs. So on March 5th, 2 searchers probing the previously unexplored area about 1,000 yards from the hiker's tent hit something not far beneath the surface. A 5th body, Rustic. His body is lying face down with his right leg bent beneath him and his right fist pulled towards his chest. He also has on a checkered shirt, must have been in at the time, sweater, ski trousers, and several pairs of socks, and a single felt shoe. So the felt shoe was like what they had on with the boots. So it was
like inside the boot?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So like a little extra layer.
Yeah.
He was also wearing a ski cap, which was still intact on his head, which is a strange theory. Strange given the theory that the wind blew the hikers from their campsite, which is a theory we'll get in later. So that's one of the theories, that there was just excessive winds that blew. Yeah.
That's bull.
Yeah. He was found midway between Dyatlov and Zina, where Dyatlov and Zina had been found. So Rustic is found midway between where Dyatlov and Zina had been found. Their bodies, in turn, lining up with the side of the tent. So he is oriented as if he's been working his way up the slope at the time of his collapse. And Hannah, I'm sorry, I was going to prepared with a map of where the bodies were, so you could see, but I'll post it on our Instagram.
You know I'm a visual learner.
I apologize. I have failed you.
It's okay.
The searchers noticed a small hollow of encrusted snow near his mouth where his breath has melted the surrounding snow. So he had been alive some time after he fell. But what's most startling is the front of his head is deeply discolored as if sustained a blunt force to his head.
Oh.
Now, 4 bodies remain. And on March 4th, the autopsies of Igor, Zina, Georgie, and Doroshenko were completed, and Rustic's was completed on March 11th. They would conclude that the 5 hikers had died from hypothermia, which isn't really surprising considering the circumstances that they were found in. But how they died, is still a mystery.
The whole wind thing I'm still thinking about.
Yeah. Don't worry, we'll get there. And I have a theory, one that makes sense that I've never heard of until I read this book. 10 days after the first bodies were found, the 5 hikers were buried in Sverdlovsk. The parents had actually fought for their right to bury their children in their hometown. The local party officials, keep in mind Communist Soviet Union, were trying to control where they were buried. They wanted them buried in Ivdel. Buried? They wanted them buried. They wanted them buried in Ivdel, and their parents wanted them buried closer to home, which is completely understandable.
Why does it matter, though?
Yeah, I don't know. And see, this is what is shady, but the officials still controlled how the funerals would be observed. The services were ordered to be split over 2 days, and when the mourners asked that the procession of the first funeral be allowed to proceed past the UPI campus that was located just south of the cemetery. The police refused and instead had the caskets directed from the morgue to the cemetery via the shortest, least conspicuous route.
So was it all about money for that part of the community?
I think, I don't know. I think they just...
Because they could?
Yeah. And I think that they didn't want a lot of publicity. They didn't want big crowds. And that is...
are hiding something.
See, that's what I was thinking. So the message from the police and city officials was clear. Large crowds of mourners and any resulting publicity weren't welcome. And so that was my question. What are they trying to hide?
Mm-hmm.
So there were more than 1,000 people flooding the neighborhood. And the director of the Dyatlov Foundation, who the author of the book had interviewed and I talked to about this, he was actually 12 years old at the time. And he lived across the street from the cemetery. And he went down and joined the mourners. And he states in the book that he could recognize the Soviet police when he saw them. He remembers seeing several men in civilian clothing paying close attention to the funeral crowd, but not the service itself. And he thinks that they were KGB and that they were there to monitor the events of the day. But why?
Why would the KGB care?
Yeah, why did this event require Soviet police? Some missing hikers? Come on.
Yeah, right. Who would care?
Yeah.
In that retrospect.
Yeah. So it seems suspicious, but I have to admit that I'm looking at this from a 2024 American lens, and I can't pretend to understand what a 1959 communist lens would look like. So what was common for the time? What was common for the government to do or to restrict? So it may have been a common practice to restrict large crowds and the publicity around them. I'm not sure. But it still seems a little shady.
I just feel like they had more to worry about in 1959 than
possibly. It was during the Cold War.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what makes it seem suspicious.
And that's why there's so much on this.
Mm-hmm.
Because why would hikers go missing all the time? Why these people?
Why these? Yeah. So Georgie was buried the following day, 3 miles from where his friends lay, and only a fraction of the mourners were present. Yudin, the hiker that had turned back early due to the pain that he was experiencing, wasn't even able to attend the funerals. He was currently in Ivdel helping investigators identify the property of the tent. And his account is heartbreaking. And in the words of Hannah, here I quote from the book.
And I quote.
Yudin encountered all the familiar items, but there were surprises too. In Kolatov's backpack, along with a broken comb, a grindstone, and an aluminum flask, Yudin found a bit of contraband. A pack of flavored cigarettes. It looked like the cunning Kolatovov, I wrote it 2 different ways, had managed to feed his nicotine addiction after all. The no smoking pledge be damned. And in Igor's notebook, Yudin discovered a photograph of Zina tucked inside. Had Igor been using a picture of his friend as a bookmark?
Oh.
I personally doubt that. Or did this mean something more?
Oh.
Sweet. It was now, of course, impossible to know. And so it went until sometime later, there laid a diminished pile of clothing and miscellaneous tools to which Yudin was unable to assign an owner, and he left the office emotionally spent. Can you imagine doing that?
No.
How hard would that be? Like sorting your dead friends' things?
No, thank you.
No, thanks.
Why did he have to do it, though?
He was the only one that would have known.
Excuses.
So after the funerals, the friends and families of the hikers began to explore alternative explanations for their deaths, along with the officials' weird behavior. Some friends had met with Georgie's father and discussed the case. These friends were hikers, and they were around the area the same time, and they told Georgie's father that the same night, February 1st, they witnessed a strange occurrence in the sky over the Ural Mountains.
Like what? Aurora Borealis?
They
or
saw
UFO?
They saw an extremely bright light of some rocket. It was so bright that the hikers who were trying to sleep went to look at it, got up out of the tent and went to look at it, and for some time, the sound of strong thunder came from afar. Another team, on February 17th, which by this time the hikers were already deceased, reported seeing orbs in the sky. The two men had gotten up to prepare breakfast, and they saw what they initially thought could be the moon, but then a spark lit in the center of the spot. It burned for several seconds, steadily grew in size, and flew swiftly west. One of the men thought it was some celestial body that was falling toward the Earth, and he thought that it was some planet that was going to come in contact with the Earth, and the Earth would perish. So, that tells us that there were numerous reports in the area around the time, not just the night, of weird lights and objects in the sky. The investigators developed the film of the hiker's camera, and one last picture from Georgie's camera would continue to puzzle everyone. The image was dark, as if shot at night or an enclosed space, but it was aimed towards an indistinct light source that dominated the left side of the frame. I will post a picture of this on our social media, but I personally, since, I'm such a camera and photography expert, think it's probably just an accidental picture. But I'll post this to show you. One volunteer searcher and fellow hiker who became closely involved with the investigation stated that he did not need photographs to tell him that there was more to the case than some hikers running up against bad weather. The prosecutor had already been exploring the possibility that they did not die as a result of the elements. Speaking of which, something interesting that was mentioned in the book was that in the first days of the investigation, the head investigator, Ivanov, reiterated that the students hadn't died of natural causes and that it had been murder. Well, in mid-March, Ivanov was called away to Moscow for reasons that he would not disclose to others. Upon his return, the volunteers and searchers noticed a pronounced change in his demeanor. They could barely recognize him. He didn't mention the murders or spheres or orbs anymore, and he advised everyone else to hold their tongues. But Suspicious. In 1990, he wrote a letter to the newspaper, and Ivanov revealed that the regional Communist Party had instructed him not to pursue the connection with the strange lights in the sky regarding the hiker's death. What? Right? During the Cold War, such topics were prohibited, and in order to prevent the slightest possibility of disclosing data, tomato, exactly,
potato.
On a missile and nuclear techniques. Interesting, don't you think?
It's a little sus, but yeah.
3 months later, almost to the day the hikers had died, on May 3rd, a Manzi searcher comes across unusual branches. They appear to have been cut by a knife, so they start probing the area, and another volunteer who had been probing found clothing at the end of his probe. So they dug down deeper and ended up digging a deep hole that would eventually reach 8 feet deep and an area of 100 square feet. They hit something hard and their hopes were raised, but it was just a tree trunk. So they moved to another area not too far away. But later that day, they found clothing while probing. What is odd is the clothing is abandoned in the snow and not attached to anybody. So it's just random clothing.
Yeah.
Some of the clothing, however, looks as if it was shredded. There is a crumpled gray Chinese woolen vest turned inside out, knitted trousers, a brown woolen sweater with lilac thread, a right trouser leg, and a bandage 1 yard long. The more the men dug, the closer they got to the creek bed. And the second day, they find more clothing. Black cotton sport trousers with the right leg missing and half the woman's sweater belonging to Lyuda. So I'm sitting here thinking, like, what the fuck is going on? Why are all these strange things being found? What happened that night? And maybe that may be why so many people, like I said, are interested in this case.
Right, because there is no explanation.
Yeah, logical explanation. So on the second evening, the men's shovel hits a body. It is clearly a man, but the decomposition from the water has made him unrecognizable. So this was, like I said, 3 months later. The snow started to melt. And so he was wearing a gray sweater and strangely 2 wristwatches. The men continue to dig, soon uncovering 3 more bodies. Lyuda's is the only one they are able to identify. She is dressed in a cap, a yellow undershirt, 2 sweaters, brown ski trousers, and 2 socks on one foot, and her other foot is wrapped with a torn sweater. So maybe the half of the sweater that was found earlier that day was cut so she could wrap it around her feet. And I'm wondering if that is why those clothes were shredded. Maybe they shredded to wrap their exposed parts of their bodies so they wouldn't freeze.
See, I was thinking Yeti, but yeah, yours is a little more logical.
Maybe. So her head is pointed upstream while the other 3 men are oriented toward the center of the stream. 2 of the men are found in a position of embrace in what appears to be an attempt to conserve heat. Does that break your heart?
It does. It's sad.
They remove the bodies from the creek and have them wrapped to slow further decomposition. Ivanov notes that the body parts that weren't in the water are still mostly intact, but the flesh that was directly in the stream had started to decompose. And what's interesting is Lyuda's tongue was missing. And I believe her eyeballs were gone. But those were also parts that were in the water. And so it would make sense. Like, I'm not going to post the videos of or the pictures of their bodies. You can look them up online if you want to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're all online, and it's sad, but I'm not going to post them.
Are they in the book or just online?
Mostly online.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
A sincere expression of gratitude to our esteemed patrons, Lynn from Massachusetts, Heather from New Jersey, Courtney from Massachusetts, Amber from Idaho, and Chelsea from Utah, for their generous monthly contributions. Their support fuels the engine of our investigative endeavors here at Wicked Wanderings.
You too can become a valued patron and unlock a realm of exclusive content by supporting our mission for as little as $3 a month. Your contribution sustains our commitment to delivering high-quality content.
Visit wickedwanderingspodcast.com and click on the support tab to join the ranks of dedicated patrons like Lynn, Heather, Amber, Courtney, and Chelsea. Your investment not only keeps our podcast thriving, but also ensures you are at the forefront of intriguing discoveries.
Thank you for considering this opportunity to deepen your engagement with Wicked Wanderings. Your support is paramount in enabling us to continue our journey into the realms of mystery and true crime. And now, back to the shit show.
And you can see how she came to rest.
Yeah.
And her face was in the stream. So
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to see that.
So Ivanov requested a helicopter to transport the bodies back to Sverdlovsk, but the Air Force pilot refused to transport them or let the bodies even close to the aircraft. He may have not been aware of the mission, or he just didn't want the bodies that were wrapped. And so he refused to carry out the task until they were placed in zinc-lined coffins, which were sealed to prevent toxic or biological leakage. I mean, I kind of understand where he was coming from. Like, bodies who start to decompose are going to start to do crazy shit. Maybe he didn't want dead body juices in his helicopter.
I mean, you're nicer than I am, because I'm like, were you just like superstitious about it? Like,
also true. Or maybe he knew something else, something that everyone else didn't. Like top secret communist squirrel shit. Say that 5 times fast. Like top secret communist squirrel shit and insider information. Either way, the zinc-lined coffins arrived the following day and the bodies were brought back to Ivdel where the autopsies were performed. The first examination was performed on 24-year-old Alexander Kolovatov. Alexander. He too was missing his footwear. His ankle had been bandaged due to a previous injury, and the coroner found that he also died of hypothermia. 37-year-old Sasha's examination seemed to be going as all the others had. He was wearing generous layers of clothing, no shoes. His skin and organs showed the same discoloration. However, on his midsection, on the right side of his chest, he had sustained a serious injury. He had 5 fractured ribs, resulting in severe hemorrhaging.
ouch.
They concluded that the fractures had been inflicted by a large force while the victim had still been alive. 23-year-old Kolya had similar violent injuries, but his were to his head. It was concluded that he had died of impressed fracture of skull dome and base with abundant hemorrhaging. They concluded again that the fractures had been inflicted while he was alive by the effect of a large force. The examination of Lyuda was the most alarming. The 22-year-old's body had a massive thoracic damage with internal hemorrhaging, including that of her right ventricle, plus fractures on 9 of her ribs. And what was most disturbing was that her tongue was missing, and her death was classified as violent. But these autopsies failed to provide any satisfactory answers to what happened that night to cause all the hikers to leave their tent. 4 days before the funerals, Ivanov ordered radiological tests performed on the hikers, but those results would not be back for a while, and the funerals of the remaining hikers were scheduled for May 22nd. And in this time, only the families of the victims were permitted to attend. This breaks my heart. Ivanov denied the family's request for open casket due to the advanced decomposition. He made an exception only for Lyuda's father. He had opened the coffin to show her father that she was dressed properly, and her father was so horrified by the condition of her body that he fainted on the spot.
Oh, that's shitty.
Right? On May 28th, 6 days after the final 4 funerals, Ivanov bowed to the pressure from his regional superiors to terminate the criminal investigation, effective immediately. The case was closed with no particular case for the hiker's death, but before he closed the case, he cited their deaths as an unknown compelling force. So now, Hannah, are you ready to explore those theories and conspiracy theories?
Oh, I absolutely am.
We will start with your favorite one, Bigfoot.
Yay!
Or rather, the Yeti.
The Yeti!
In Russia. So some people believe that Bigfoot was involved.
Duh.
Especially considering one of the pictures that was on one of the hikers' cameras.
Oh, really?
Like, if you look at this picture... Oh, I think I have it on my phone. Hold on. I think I prepped this one at least. And let's see. I did.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Airdropping to Rob. So that is one of the pictures.
Oh, get out. Get the fuck out. That's from the one their cameras?
Yep. Right?
Isn't the Yeti white?
I don't know.
This is clearly black.
It is.
It's a dark figure that's very human-like. I definitely don't think it's a Yeti. It's clearly a person.
So I will post this on our social media for the listeners, and it definitely makes you pause. So maybe the Yeti was tracking them the whole time, lying and waiting until they were all nice and cozy in their tent before he attacked. I mean, it could definitely explain some of the injuries they received.
Oh, I have a vote for this one. That's
Or
awesome.
maybe that picture is actually one of the hikers messing around.
No!
That's what I would go with.
This was actually debunked. And Josh Gates mentioned it on his episode of Expedition Unknown, as there was another picture on the same roll of film of the hiker after this one.
You guys are no fun.
Sorry, Hannah.
I still think Bigfoot is real, and there are episodes to
I'm
come.
not saying he is not real. I'm just saying not in this case. He did not.
He is alive and well.
I'm sure. Sure he is. Another theory is a Manzi attack. And it continues to get mentioned even though it was quickly discarded in 1959. So remember, the Manzi were the local indigenous people.
Yeah.
And there were tracks of the Manzi hunters in the area, but they weren't near the tent, and the nearest Manzi village was 60 miles away. The Manzi also knew to stay away from that mountain, and they were also a historically peaceful people. And they even participated in the search efforts for the hikers. So that's a no-go.
Mwah, mwah.
Another theory, and I briefly mentioned this before, is that they were blown away by high winds. This one I hadn't really heard of until I read this book, but
It's bullshit.
But the hikers were actually warned about dangerous winds on the pass from that forester that they talked to. And there are actually stories of locals being swept away. And this is also an angle seriously considered by investigators at the time. And the idea was that one or two people were outside the tent, the ones that were probably wearing the cloth boot liners, and they had stepped outside to pee or whatever when an overpowering wind took them by surprise. Their cries roused the inside of the tent not only to jump outside to save them, but also to cut through the canvas in their haste. But the theory suggests that all the hikers would have flung themselves into the wind to save their friends, one by one, heedless of the dangers. I personally don't think this theory is likely, and I can't believe that the wind or their friends missing would have been enough of a reason to get them all outside of the tent without their boots or cutting through the tent. And it would have had to have blown all the 9 hikers off the face of the mountain but not blow the tent away or any of the hikers' hats. So I personally don't think that this is.
Nope. Plausible? Absolutely not.
There's also a theory of group of armed men that came in the middle of this out-of-the-way mountain with high winds in the middle of winter at night to lead the hikers to their deaths, but not steal anything from their tent.
So, while I think that Bigfoot is more plausible in this situation, it is probably these cloaked men during the night. So.
Maybe. It was actually briefly considered by Ivanov and his investigators, especially after they discovered the knife slashes at the back of the tent. But that was mostly dismissed once they realized that the cuts to the tent came from the inside, not the outside. There was also only 9 sets of footprints at the scene, and there is simply no evidence of any visitors at the tent that night. And this scenario could also definitely provide some answers to why 3 of the hikers had violent injuries. But there is actually a really good explanation for that, which I've never heard before as well. So the 3 hikers who sustained and died from injuries were also found at the bottom of a 24-foot ravine. They were in the dark, they were running from the tent, and didn't know what was ahead of them. They could have very well fallen on some rocks from 24 feet that caused those injuries. As for Lyuda's missing tongue, it could be blamed on natural decomposition. It is likely that the microfauna in the water that she had been laying in for several weeks had decomposed the fleshiest parts of her body. A popular theory is that the government was conducting some weapons testing. Like I mentioned earlier, there are multiple accounts of people seeing lights in the sky around that time. This is one theory that Ivanov had believed to be connected to the hikers' deaths. In 1990 interview, he said that he wasn't sure that the orbs were weapons testing, but he was certain that they were directly related to the death of the hikers. In the Expedition Unknown episode, the director of the Dyatlov Foundation had a large piece of metal that was found at the mountain, and Josh Gates was able to cut off a piece of that metal and have it tested, and discovered that that piece of the metal was in fact from a missile, but one that was made after the incident. But this is where the whole government cover-up thing comes into play. Why did Ivanov change his attitude towards the case after visiting Moscow? Why did he tell others to hold his tongue? And why did they pressure him to close the case? So it's definitely interesting and would definitely be an interesting rabbit hole to go down. There is another theory about radiation-related tests, as some of the clothes were tested. And I don't personally believe this one holds any weight, because they found the highest radiation on the clothes of Alexander Kolevatov, who was going to school to become a nuclear physicist, and had mostly been likely exposed elsewhere. And Josh Gates had also taken a core sample from the local trees and had them tested for radiation, and they didn't find anything higher than what is normal for the environment. There are two more theories I will discuss, and I'm going to leave the most likely one, in my opinion, to have happened for last. The other one is an avalanche that sent them running from their tent. Yeah. Donnie Ichor, the author of Dead Mountain, I think that's how you pronounce his name, but, you know, why not fuck up that one when I've been fucking up the other ones? Actually did the hike to the Ural Mountains with the director of the founder of the Dyatlov Foundation. So he actually did the hike in the winter. Granted, he had snowmobiles and stuff that they didn't have in 1995. And he actually went to and
1995?
1959. And he actually went and paid his respects to the spot of the tent. After being there himself, he thinks that the avalanche is unlikely, and they did measurements of the incline. So the measurements of the incline pointed that an avalanche in the area would be unlikely. There are no records of an avalanche occurring on that mountain, and certainly not in the years since that night. In 1959, the investigators had not even entertained the idea as an avalanche as a possibility, nor had they found any evidence. The tent was mostly intact and the poles were securely in the ground. And I mentioned in the first episode that after the Expedition Unknown episode in 2019, that the Russian government agreed to open the case again. And they released their findings in 2020, I believe, or 2021, that the avalanche was the cause. Right.
Shit.
So the last one, like I said, I've never heard of before, and to be honest, it kind of makes the most sense to me. What baffles me with this case is why did these experienced hikers with Dyatlov as their hiking star and leader leave the tent, which would be considered a place of safety from the elements, with little clothing on and below 0 temperatures? It doesn't make sense. So to me, since the tent was cut from the inside, the threat was in the tent. They needed to get out of the tent fast, and they needed to get out now. There was no time for coats, boots, clothing, nothing. They needed to get out as fast as they could to save their lives. But why? So none of these theories have an explanation for that, in my opinion, except another theory. Donnie Igor explores this in his book, and he was a surfer, so he was interested in weather, and he figured that there had to be some natural weather event that happened that night. He had found an article in Physics Today issue from 2000 that was titled Atmospheric Infrasound. And here, I quote from the book.
And
I quote, "The study examined the occurrence of sound waves that travel through the air at frequencies below those on the audible spectrum. Frequencies referred to as infrasound. Infrasound is the opposite of ultrasound. It occurs below the threshold of human hearing at 20 hertz. A pioneer in the biological effects of infrasound was the Russian-born French scientist Vladimir Gavreau, who discovered its impact by accident. During the 1960s, Gavreau and his lab assistants started experiencing inexplicable nausea, pain in their eardrums, and shaking lab equipment, all without no apparent cause. After all the chemical and airborne sources had been ruled out, he eventually concluded that inaudible low-frequency sound waves were being generated by a motor of a large fan and duct system in the building where the lab was located. These low-frequency waves can cause the eardrum to vibrate the hair cells of the inner ear, and the effect of this is that although the sound may not be audible to the casual listener, but it can be extremely disruptive to the body. The study outlined, lost my spot. Some of these occurrences in nature, in particular when winds of a certain speed encounter an obstructive landscape. And we already know that there were high winds that night. This can actually be devastating to humans, causing nausea, severe illness, psychological disturbances, and even suicide. Donnie was actually able to meet with one of these researchers of the study, and they explored the area of the Dyatlov Pass to see if boot rock would be the cause, which is this large out-of-place like boulder that looks like a hiking boot. And it was actually turned into somewhat of a memorial for the hikers, which is kind of cool. But the researchers looked at boot rock and found that that would have not caused this effect to happen. But actually, it would be the dome at the top of the mountain that would have. They explained that the symmetrical dome shape of the summit, combined with its proximity to the tent location, would have created the ideal conditions for what's called Kármán vortex. It was a combination of that and infrasound that could have happened that night. They said that it would have been difficult to come up with a more ideal confluence of weather and landscape to create Kármán vortex. With vortices, or whatever the plural word for that is, that would produce infrasound. They would have been screaming right outside the hiker's tent that night, so like kind of tornado whirling, creating an intense discomfort and fear that they couldn't begin to understand. The researcher states, and I quote, "I can imagine they are all in the tent. They start to hear the winds pick up. Then to the south, they start to feel a vibration in the ground. They hear a roar that seems to pass them from the west to east, and then they start to feel more vibration in the floor. The fabric of the tent vibrates. Another roar of a freight train passes by, this time from north to south. Roaring sounds turn horrifying. Their chest cavities begin to vibrate from the infrasound created by the stronger vortex now passing. Effects of the infrasound are beginning to be felt by the hikers. Panic, fear, trouble breathing, as physiological frequencies are generated. And it is possible that this is what was enough to cause the hikers to escape that tent. Nothing was making sense. They were panicking, and they had to get out now. I personally believe that they ran out of the tent. They may have been headed towards a previous campground, or, like I mentioned my theory before, headed to their supplies that they had built a shelter for, with the extra food, the firewood. And I believe that the 3 hikers were in front, and fell down that ravine. In the meantime, the other 2 were building a fire. They had about 8 hours before they would die of hypothermia. So what did they do in that time? Who died first? Why were there shredded clothes? And why were the other 3 headed back to the tent? Were they trying to see if they could get clothes or supplies and they just couldn't make it? All of this we will never know. And that, my dear wanderers and friends, is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident.
I still think it's Bigfoot, but
You would.
with all that said,
That last theory really makes a lot of sense.
It does, doesn't it? And when I read
it's
that,
Bigfoot,
I was
Rob.
like mind blown. Because there has to be something, because these were experienced hikers. They've been hiking on numerous. There wouldn't be a reason for them to leave the tent without their boots and clothes unless there was an immediate threat.
Yeah, like Bigfoot. Gosh, guys.
Yes, but so that is my episode for the night.
That was really good, Jess. Thank you.
Thanks for a nice 2-parter.
Your voice was lulling me to sleep because it was just so sultrous and low. And
You're welcome. I actually, as I was reading it, I was like, fuck, I was going to have them do this. I was going to have you guys close your eyes and imagine being in the tent and experiencing
I would
all
have.
those things.
You would have heard.
But yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I'm actually more sold on the infrasound than any other theory, I think.
No, Bigfoot.
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 Bigfoot. 2-1.
I'm with you, Jess.
Kenzie votes Bigfoot. Kenzie's passed out.
She's passed out. All right. Good night, wanderers.
Good night.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks for listening today. This show wouldn't be possible without our amazing producer and editor, Rob Fitzpatrick, who works tirelessly behind the scenes to bring you the best content.
And a special thanks to Taiga Soundprod for providing the captivating intro music. Cinematic Intro 24.
And of course, we can't forget the hauntingly beautiful outro music, Rhino's Theme, composed by Kevin MacLeod.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platforms, like Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Your feedback means the world to us.
Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram for behind-the-scenes glimpses, updates, and more thrilling content. You can find us at Wicked Wanderings Podcast.
Thank you so much for listening and being part of our Wicked Wanderings community. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Stay curious,
Keep exploring.
and always remember to keep on wandering.
What's going on? This is John Olson, and I am the host of Scalarius. Scalarius is your new favorite paranormal and comedy podcast. At Scalarius, we talk to comedians about paranormal experiences they've had while on the road, whether it was in a hotel they were staying in, a bar, club, or theater they were performing in, or maybe it was just a story they were dying to tell. Either way, Scalarius is the podcast that you need to hear. You can find Scalarius anywhere there's podcasts, but specifically right here on Spotify.